Welcome to the deep dive. Ever wondered how those tiny humans go from, just blobs of perception to actually understanding things?
It's an incredible journey, isn't it?
Totally. Today, we're plunging into infant cognitive development, how babies learn, remember, start figuring out the world.
Yeah, how'd those little minds get going?
We've got some child development textbook excerpts to guide us. And our mission really is just to unpack the key ideas, the cool findings about how infants think.
It sounds good. It was a fascinating area.
Yeah.
Even from the earliest days, they're not just passive sponges. They're actively working things out.
Right, they're doing stuff. Which brings us straight to Jean Piaget, doesn't it? You can't really talk about child cognition without him.
Absolutely. Piaget's big idea, fundamentally, was that knowledge comes from doing, from direct motor behavior.
Not just from seeing or hearing things passively.
Exactly. It's about interaction. Touching, grasping, moving. That's how they build their understanding, according to him. Hands-on learning right from the start.
So all that mouthing and dropping things isn't just making a mess, it's vital cognitive work.
Pretty much. And he proposed these stages everyone goes through. Universal stages.
Okay, what's the basic roadmap he laid out?
Well, there are four main ones. Sensoromotor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. But for infants, we're zeroing in on that first one.
Sensoromotor. Makes sense, given the focus on senses and motor actions. Birth to about 2 years, roughly.
That's the time frame, yeah. It's where the real groundwork gets laid.
And what drives the development within this stage or between stages? He had specific mechanisms, right?
Two key principles. Assimilation and accommodation.
Okay.
So assimilation is like fitting new information into what you already know, into your existing mental structures, or schemas, as he called them.
Like seeing a chihuahua and thinking dog because it fits your existing dog schema.
Precisely. But then accommodation is when the new thing doesn't quite fit and you have to adjust your thinking, change the schema.
So if you then see, I don't know, a penguin, you might need to tweak your bird schema because it swims instead of flying high.
Exactly. You accommodate the new information by changing the schema itself. It's this constant back and forth that drives cognitive growth.
And moving between the big stages, it's not like flipping a switch.
No. Piaget saw it as more gradual. Kids might show behaviors from adjacent stages. It's more of a flow.
Right, not neat boxes. Now that sensoromotor stage itself, it's got substages, 6 of them.
Yeah, he broke it down further. It starts with substage 1, simple reflexes. Basically birth to about 1 month.
Just the built-in stuff, sucking, grabbing.
Exactly. But even then, they start adapting, like learning to suck differently on a bottle versus a pacifier. That's accommodation, even at that tiny level.
Wow, okay. Then substage 2.
First habits and primary circular reactions. Roughly 1 to 4 months. Now they start coordinating separate actions into habits.
Like finding their thumb and sucking on it repeatedly.
Yes, and the primary means it's focused on their own body. They repeat actions they find interesting or pleasurable, centered on themselves.
Okay. What changes in substage 3?
Secondary circular reactions. 4 to 8 months. Now the focus shifts outward. They start acting on the environment to see what happens.
Like shaking a rattle to hear the noise?
Exactly. Or kicking their legs to make a mobile move. They're repeating actions that produce effects in the outside world.
Making things happen. Got it. Substage 4.
Coordination of secondary circular reactions.
Yeah.
8 to 12 months. This is a big one. They start showing goal-directed behavior. Meaning they can combine different actions, different schemas to achieve a goal. Like pushing aside a cushion to get a toy hidden behind it.
Intention. And didn't Piaget think object permanence starts here?
Yes, the basic understanding that things still exist even when you can't see them. Before this, he thought it was kind of out of sight, out of mind.
Okay, we'll come back to that. What's substage 5?
Tertiary circular reactions.
Yeah.
12 to 18 months. Now they become little scientists.
How so?
They start deliberately varying their actions to see the different consequences. Not just repeating the same action, but experimenting. Dropping a toy from different heights, maybe.
Testing the limits. Cool.
Yeah.
And the last one, substage 6.
Beginnings of thought. 18 months to 2 years. The huge leap here is mental representation. Symbolic thought.
Thinking about things that aren't right in front of them.
Exactly. Forming mental images. This allows for things like deferred imitation, seeing someone do something and then copying it later when that person isn't there.
That's massive. Holding an idea in mind. Okay, so that's Piaget's framework. How does it hold up today? What do people generally agree on?
Well, the overall sequence he described, that basic progression of abilities, it's still seen as pretty accurate. His emphasis on infants being active learners is fundamental.
Yeah, the idea that they construct their own understanding.
Right, and the general order of things like object permanence, mental representation, that basic sequence is largely accepted.
But there must be criticisms or refinements now.
Oh, absolutely. The whole stage concept itself is debated. Some researchers, like Siegler, suggest thinking more in terms of overlapping waves of cognitive strategies rather than distinct steps.
More fluid, less rigid boundaries.
Exactly. Also, some argue Piaget might have overemphasized motor actions and maybe underestimated what infants understand just through looking and listening, their perceptual abilities.
And object permanence, you mentioned that. Did later research challenge his timing?
Yes, significantly. Researchers like René Béarchon using different methods, like showing babies impossible events.
A violation of expectations.
Right. They found evidence that infants seem to understand objects continue to exist much earlier than Piaget thought, maybe even as young as 3 or 4 months. Their looking times suggest surprise when an object seems to vanish impossibly.
Wow, that really pushes the timeline back. Any other major critiques?
Well, there's the cultural aspect. Most of Piaget's initial work was with Western children. So questions remain about how universal every specific detail is across different cultures.
Always important to consider context. Okay, so Piaget gives us this action-oriented, stage-based view. What's the other major way of looking at infant cognition described in our source?
That would be the information processing approach.
Right. How does that differ?
It's less focused on stages and more on the mechanics of thought, how individuals take in information, store it, and use it, like a computer in some ways.
So development isn't about moving stages, but about getting better at handling information. Faster processing, bigger memory.
Exactly. Cognitive growth is seen as increasing sophistication, speed, and capacity in these processes.
And what are the core processes they focus on?
3 basic ones: encoding, getting the information in; storage, holding onto it; and retrieval, getting it back out when you need it.
Encoding, storage, retrieval. Sounds like the fundamentals of memory.
Pretty much. And another key concept here is automatization.
What's that?
It's about how much attention an activity needs. Things start off needing a lot of conscious effort, but with practice, they become automatic.
Like learning to walk. At first, it takes total concentration, then it's automatic.
Precisely. And infants get really good at automatizing lots of complex things, freeing up mental resources for new learning.
Makes sense. Now, this Mickey Mouse math thing, that sounds intriguing. 5-month-olds doing math.
Well, sort of. Karen Wynn did these clever studies. Infants saw, say, one Mickey Mouse doll. A screen came up. They saw a hand place a second Mickey behind the screen.
Okay.
Then the screen dropped. Sometimes it revealed 2 Mickeys, the correct outcome. Sometimes maybe only 1 or 3, an incorrect outcome.
And the babies reacted differently.
Significantly. They looked much longer at the incorrect outcomes.
Yeah. As
if they were surprised or knew something was wrong.
Wow. Suggesting they have some basic expectation about numbers, addition and subtraction almost.
That's the interpretation, yeah. A rudimentary numerical sense, way earlier than we used to think.
Fascinating. So if they're processing numbers and remembering impossible events, what can infants remember? We often hear about infantile amnesia.
Right, the idea that we don't remember much, if anything, before age 3. But research shows infants do have memory.
How do we know?
Well, even recognizing familiar faces or toys shows memory. They can distinguish new things from old things. Memory is defined as that whole process: recording, storing, retrieving information.
So the amnesia idea isn't quite right. Or maybe the memories just don't last.
It's more complex. Recent research shows infants do retain memories, sometimes for weeks or months, depending on the memory and context. Think about learning motor skills, like how to kick a mobile.
I remember that.
Yes. The issue might be less about storage and more about retrieval later in life. The lack of language skills in infancy makes it hard to encode memories in a way that our later language-based minds can easily access.
So the memories might be encoded differently, maybe more non-verbally?
That's a leading theory. And neurologically, there's a difference too. Implicit memory, unconscious stuff, like skills and habits, develops earlier. Explicit memory, conscious recall of facts and events develops later and seems more tied to language and specific brain structures like the hippocampus.
Okay, so different memory systems coming online at different times. Now, infant intelligence, that sounds like a minefield. How do you even measure intelligence in a baby?
It is tricky. I mean, experts don't even fully agree on defining intelligence in adults, let alone infants.
Good point. So what approaches do researchers use? Developmental scales?
Yeah, that's one way. Tools like the Gesell Developmental Quotient, or DQ. It looks at motor skills, language, adaptive behavior, personal social skills, and gives a score relative to norms.
And the Bailey scales?
Similar idea. The Bailey scales are widely used, assessing cognitive, language, and motor development from just a few weeks old up to about 3.5 years. They give a snapshot of developmental progress.
Okay, comparing them to averages, what about the information processing angle on intelligence?
That looks less at overall scores and more at the efficiency of processing. How quickly do infants take in and process information?
How would you measure that?
Through things like habituation speed, how fast they get bored with a repeated stimulus. Faster habituation is thought to reflect more efficient processing. Also, visual recognition memory, how quickly they recognize something they've seen before. And cross-motor transference.
Cross-modal, like recognizing something by sight that they only touched before.
Exactly. The ability to integrate information across different senses. The idea is that these processing speeds and abilities might correlate to some degree with later IQ scores.
Might correlate, so it's not a perfect prediction.
Definitely not perfect. The correlation is moderate at best. These measures tell us something about early cognitive functioning, but they don't fully predict adult IQ. And crucially, IQ tests themselves only measure certain kinds of intelligence.
Right, not creativity or emotional intelligence or overall life success.
Exactly. So both Piaget's ideas and information processing give us valuable pieces, but we need brain science and social context for the full picture.
Absolutely. Okay, let's switch gears slightly to another huge area, language. How do we go from gurgles to grammar?
It's one of the most amazing human achievements.
Yeah.
Language, fundamentally, is this systematic, meaningful arrangement of symbols for communication.
Symbols being words, mostly.
Words, sounds, gestures sometimes.
Yeah.
And it has structure. Phonology of the sounds.
Like B versus P?
Right. Morphemes, the smallest units of meaning, like ing or dog. And semantics, the actual meaning of words and sentences.
Okay, the building blocks. But how does it start? Before words?
Pre-linguistic communication. Babies communicate using sounds, expressions, gestures, imitation. Crying is communication, right?
Definitely gets attention.
Then comes babbling, usually around 2 or 3 months, starting with vowel sounds, then adding consonants. It sounds like speech, but is meaningless initially.
Just practicing sounds.
Seems like it. And what's really cool is that by about 6 months, babbling starts to sound like the infant's native language. They narrow down the sounds they use to the ones they hear around them.
Wow, adapting already. Then the magic moment. First words.
Usually between 10 and 14 months, though there's a lot of variation. Often simple words for important people or objects. Mama, dada, ball. Culture plays a role in what those first words are.
And they're often holophrases. Right. One word meaning a whole sentence.
Exactly. Up might mean pick me up. Context is everything.
Then they start stringing them together.
Yep. Usually around 18, 24 months, you get 2-word sentences. Often it's telegraphic speech.
Like a telegram, just the essential words.
Right. More milk. Go car. They leave out articles, prepositions, auxiliary verbs, but the meaning gets across.
Efficient. What about those funny ways toddlers use words, like calling all men dada?
Ah, yes. Overextension. Using a word too broadly. The opposite is underextension. Using a word too restrictively, like doggy, only applies to the family pet, not other dogs.
Both are common stages in figuring out word meanings.
Very common. And kids seem to vary in their overall style, too. Some are more referential, focused on labeling objects. Others are more expressive, focused on feelings, needs, social routines.
Interesting. So the big question, how do they learn all this? What are the theories?
Well, classic learning theory approach suggests it's reinforcement and conditioning. Parents reward sounds that are closer to real words, shaping the child's vocalizations. Imitation is also key.
Like Skinner's behaviorism applied to language.
Pretty much. But critics say it doesn't fully explain how kids learn grammatical rules so quickly, rules they've never explicitly been taught or rewarded for, or how they create novel sentences.
Right, they say things they've never heard before, so what's the alternative?
The nativist approach, heavily associated with Noam Chomsky.
The LAD, language acquisition device.
Exactly. Chomsky argued humans are born with an innate biological mechanism, the LAD, that contains a kind of universal grammar. It allows kids to figure out the rules of whatever language they're exposed to.
Nature over nurture, basically. Is there evidence for that?
There's some supporting evidence, like the discovery of genes related to speech processing and the fact that children learn language in similar stages across cultures.
Right.
But it's also challenged. Non-human primates have very limited language capacity, even with intense training. And social interaction seems incredibly important, which the strict nativist view might downplay.
So nature versus nurture. Is there a middle ground?
Yes, the interactionist perspective is probably the most widely accepted view now. It says language develops through a combination of innate biological abilities and crucial environmental influences, especially social interaction.
Nature and nurture working together.
Makes sense, doesn't it? Our biology primes us for language, but we need the right experiences and interactions to actually develop it.
Speaking of interaction, what about infant-directed speech? That sort of high-pitched, sing-songy way people talk to babies.
Sometimes called parentese or motherese. Short sentences, simple vocabulary, high pitch, lots of repetition, and exaggerated intonation.
Does it actually help?
Research suggests it really does. It grabs infants' attention, highlights word boundaries, and conveys emotion effectively. It seems almost instinctively tailored to help language learning.
Fascinating how we do that. The source also mentions something about diminutives, those Y or IE endings.
Yeah, there's a figure showing that while using diminutives, doggy, danky, decreases as kids age, adults tend to use them more often when speaking to girls compared to boys, even at the same age.
Any idea why?
The source just poses it as a question about potential cultural significance. Does this subtle difference in language reflect or maybe even reinforce different expectations? It's food for thought.
Definitely. Okay, wrapping this all up, based on Piaget, information processing, language theories, what are the key takeaways for supporting infant cognitive growth?
The source boils it down nicely. Provide lots of opportunities for safe exploration. Let them interact with the world. Be responsive, verbally and non-verbally. Talk to them. React to their cues.
Reading is important too, right?
Yes, read to them, even from very early on. But also understand you don't need to be constantly stimulating them or hovering. Downtime is important too.
And don't push too hard.
Exactly. Avoid expecting too much too soon. Create a supportive, engaging environment, but let them develop at their own pace. Nurture their curiosity.
Great advice. So we've covered a lot. Piaget's action-based stages, the mind as processor view, the beginnings of memory and intelligence tests, and the incredible journey of language. It really is a whirlwind of development in those first couple of years.
It lays the foundation for everything that follows. Truly remarkable.
It really is. And maybe a final thought for everyone listening. We've seen this constant dance between what babies are born with and how their experiences shape them. So thinking about that interaction, what do you think are the most crucial experiences we can provide in those early years to really foster a lifelong love of learning and discovery? Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.